Music gives a soul to the universe, wings to the mind, flight to the imagination, and life to everything. Here's a question for you. How do you judge music? Everyone looks at music in a different way, and as such, judging music, like all art forms, cannot be done objectively. After forming our Games of the Decade list, we realized that despite our opposing tastes, both of us are suckers for a good soundtrack. To be on this list, the game must have a fantastic top-to-bottom original soundtrack. Only having one or two great songs won't cut it. The game's soundtrack had to have been released between January 1st, 2010 and December 31st, 2019, and the game cannot have been a remake. In no particular order, this is our list of the best video game original soundtracks of the decade. We begin with a soundtrack that is both well-rounded and specifically themed. Strings constantly move up and down scales to mimic the ebbs and flows of flying through the air, all backed up by percussion that belongs in a Sousa piece. At the center of it all is the overuse of the harp, giving each song a distinct, heavenly quality. One of the more uniquely stylized entries, Cuphead's soundtrack oozes charm and wonder at every turn. Interestingly, despite doing nothing unique with the big band genre, its mere existence in this time period is itself unique. We've said it before, what's old is new again. Persona 5 as a game is all over the place. Its soundtrack is themed similarly, but each song is staged perfectly with each in-game event, giving everything a much more cohesive feel than it would have otherwise. If you want a little bit of everything, this is the soundtrack for you.
You never see it coming. You see that my mind
There are times where you just want to kick ass. Doom understands that, and supplies you with an intense array of chaotic noise, courtesy of one of the best composers currently working today. The way this soundtrack keeps moving you forward against all odds is incredible, and just might be the best part of the game. Red Dead Redemption 2 perfectly captures the atmosphere of a time period long since past. Twangy guitars, subdued horns, and a simple pulsing percussion drive the setting excellently. Couple that with sublime old-school folk tunes, and you've got a soundtrack that's as well-rounded as it is specifically themed. In Breath of the Wild, Link isn't trying to save Hyrule. He's trying to rebuild it. The soundtrack reflects this by replacing the bombastic and over-the-top tunes of older entries with a series of calm, melancholic songs. Expertly underscored with simple piano themes, it's easy to achieve wanderlust with the music taking a back seat for the first time in franchise history. On the opposite end of the spectrum is Mario Kart 8, Lord of the Bombastic Theme. Wild horn melodies and excellent use of the saxophone give Mario Kart 8 a soundtrack that stands out amongst the crowd. Valhalla reminds us that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Nothing present here is terribly unique, but instead refined to a superb polish. Jazzy bass lines and fantastic engineering drive the experience home as you get to know your customers and figure out what makes them tick. It's impossible to talk about Hotline Miami without mentioning its soundtrack. Embodying 80s noir with perfection, every song is wonderfully engineered to reflect the events unfolding as they happen. It's almost unfair to say to the designers, but this game is nothing without its soundtrack. Drawing inspiration from all over, Sea of Thieves thrives thanks to its atmosphere, and its soundtrack is no exception. The music delivers a unique yet familiar tone thanks to its choice of instruments that haven't seen widespread use in hundreds of years. Despite being rendered obsolete by modern hardware, there's something innately special about chiptunes and the era they come from. Shovel Knight's soundtrack is an important reminder that music doesn't age like video games do. Long live 8-bit. The only thing Mighty Switch Force wants to be, in the traditional sense, is fun. The soundtrack certainly does a lot to enforce that, with its songs harkening back to a simpler, more naive time period. A simple soundtrack for a simple game. The most recent soundtrack on this list, River City Girls, displays excellent engineering on top of energetic compositions. With an arcade feel through and through, lots of echo and reverb was used to give every song a full and frenetic touch that rounds off the experience wonderfully. When a musician designs a video game, you get something like Undertale. More specifically, you get a soundtrack filled to the brim with theming and motif on a level we've never seen before. It also features the most memorable video game song of the last 10 years, so that's got to count for something. Combining the modern and the retro, Celeste's soundtrack can't be summed up easily. It's a reflection not just of the game, but the crew that made it. It's anxiety-inducing and creepy, all while being joyful and whimsical as you attempt to wrestle with your demons and climb that mountain. All of the FromSoft Souls games have excellent music, but Bloodborne tops them all. Lots of dissonant chords and eerie choirs sell the unknowable eldritch horrors you encounter. It's not easy to be frightened by music alone, but Bloodborne's soundtrack is as haunting as it is exquisite. Supermario Odyssey was a return to form for the Mario franchise. The soundtrack goes beyond that. You won't find a greater variety of catchy tunes anywhere else. Topping everything off is a franchise-defining theme song that took everyone by surprise. One of the best ways to build a world is to build music around it. Borrowing elements from cyberpunk properties like Blade Runner and Ghost in the Shell, Nier Automata's soundtrack is expertly designed to guide you through the experience of figuring out what makes everything work. Out of context, Revengeance's soundtrack is just generic nu metal. In context, it's almost perfectly suited for the game it belongs to. The boss themes in particular are exquisite, with lyrics that speak for each boss and sell the importance of every fight. Ori and the Blind Forest's soundtrack sometimes feels like an experiment to see if you can get away with using the same leitmotif in as many pieces as possible. If that's the case, then the experiment was a success. Instruments are themed and placed to perfection, with soft piano bridging everything together.